Good afternoon, everyone. We are absolutely delighted to welcome you to the second plenary talk of AILA 2023. And I'm honoured to introduce Professor Virginia Yip, whose work I and many others, I'm sure here, have followed for a very long time. Virginia received her BA in linguistics at the University of Texas at Austin and her PhD from the University of Southern California. She's currently a professor in the Department of Linguistics and Modern Languages at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, CUHK, a department that she actually chaired from 2011 to 2014. She's the founder and director of the Childhood Bilingualism Research Centre at CUHK, and she co-founded and co-directs the University of Cambridge CUHK Joint Laboratory for Bilingualism. She's also the director of the CUHK Peking University System of Taiwan Joint Research Centre for Language and Human Complexity, and she co-directs the Bilingualism and Language Disorders Laboratory at CUHK Shenzhen Research Institute. I'm sure many of you know that Virginia's research interests include early childhood development, language and cognitive development, bilingualism, bilingual acquisition, second language acquisition, Cantonese, Chaozhou and comparative Chinese grammar, psycholinguistics, and cognitive neuroscience. Virginia has also authored or co-authored over 60 articles and 10 books. For example, she's the author of Interlanguage and Learnability from Chinese to English, published by John Benjamins, and she co-authored with her husband, Stephen Matthews, a series of books on Cantonese grammar published by Routledge, including Cantonese, a comprehensive grammar, basic Cantonese, and intermediate Cantonese. Her very well-known, and I'm sure very well-read, 2007 monograph, The Bilingual Child, Early Development and Language Contact, co-authored again with Stephen Matthews, published by Cambridge University Press, documented the early language development of her 3 bilingual children. The book received the Linguistic Society of America's prestigious Leonard Bloomfield Award in 2009, and it was highly commended for presenting, I quote, interesting new data and insightful analysis of bilingual development, based on the most extensive bilingual corpus yet assembled, and drawing on both generative and typological theoretical perspectives, the authors provide an extensive, informed, and data-rich treatment of a difficult problem. The book sets a new standard for the study of childhood bilingualism and shows how this study bears on many different areas of linguistics, including monolingual acquisition, language contact, syntactic theory, typology, and historical linguistics. Virginia is currently an editor of the Journal of Chinese Linguistics, and she served on the editorial board of numerous highly rated journals, Bilingualism, Language and Cognition, the Journal of Child Language, the International Journal of Bilingualism, Languages, Linguistic Approaches to Bilingualism, Second Language Research, and Multilingual Education. She's also served as a panel member of the Humanities and Social Sciences panel at the European Research Council, and she was elected a Fellow of the Hong Kong Academy of the Humanities in 2007, and she's also served as a consultant for Singapore's Government Ministry of Education and the Hong Kong Academy of Gifted Education. She's given over 25 keynotes at many major conferences. And Virginia Yip and Stephen Matthews and their team created the Hong Kong Bilingual Child Language Corpus. And this is the first longitudinal bilingual corpus in which Cantonese is represented alongside English, and it's the largest multimedia corpus in the Child Language Data Exchange System, so CHILDS, based at Carnegie Mellon University, and I'm sure many of you are very familiar with it. The corpus features 170 hours of audio and video files of 4 families raising their children bilingually in Cantonese and English. So we are truly honoured this afternoon to welcome Virginia today for this AILA 23 plenary talk in Lyon. and her talk today, she'll be talking for approximately 45 minutes. Her talk is entitled Toward Diversification of Bilingualism Acquisition Research, Insights from Heritage Bilingualism. So please welcome Virginia Yip.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Kathy. So hello, everyone. I am Virginia Yip from the Chinese University of Hong Kong. The title of my talk is Toward Diversification of Bilingual Acquisition Research, Insights from Heritage Bilingualism. It's indeed a great honor and privilege to give this keynote speech on this special occasion. I'd like to congratulate AILA on its 60th anniversary. Happy birthday! Thank you for giving me this wonderful platform to talk about my work. Special thanks go to the organizing committee for their kind invitation. Thank you also for making the abstract available in English, French, German, and Spanish. Thank you, Julian, Shisha, Isabel, Natalie, and Gregory for your brilliant efforts in organizing this phenomenal conference. I really appreciate the time Gregory and Kathy spent with me on making sure everything is set up for this plenary. I'd also like to acknowledge the amazing scientific community and the entire AILA community. To echo the theme of this conference, diversity and social cohesion in a globalized world, this talk is about celebrating and promoting diversity and inclusion from the perspective of bilingual acquisition. I'll suggest that it's just as important to diversify the language pairs, acquisition contexts, and research methods as to move away from monolingualism as norm, treat bilingualism and multilingualism as typical, and include understudied and underrepresented languages in our studies. I'll present some of our lab's work on heritage bilingualism as a unique acquisition context that is part of this diversification effort. As a point of departure, I'd like to draw your attention to a recent letter issued by the National Science Foundation in the US that aims to stimulate diversification in language science research. It highlights the disproportionate involvement of learners of specific Indo-European languages, monolingual learners, narrow socio-demographic and SES groups, and US and Western European settings, as well as narrow sampling practices. I think the message in this document is one that resonates with us. It has huge funding implications as the kind of proposals they invite are expected to broaden the representation of learners, languages, cultures, contexts, and locations that are sampled in language science research. This is a collaborative initiative across several programs, including linguistics, developmental science, science of learning, etc., calling for proposals using multiple behavioral or neural methodologies and analysis in order to advance more generalizable and replicable theories in the language and communication sciences via diversified sampling practices, languages of study, methodologies, and theoretical perspectives. I think the letter is really timely and sets the agenda and direction for our future research. Let's take a look at how linguistic diversity is distributed around the world. The current figure given in Ethnologue is 7,168 languages in 142 language families. However, this amazing diversity is rapidly declining. About 40% of languages are endangered, with fewer than 1,000 users. Many languages are in endangerment and becoming extinct. The next 50 years represents the last chance to document acquisition in many of them. Rapid language loss is accompanied by loss of diversity in ethnic and cultural heritage. These are core values that we care about as the AILA community. So here's a map of endangered languages to give you an idea of where they are distributed. Asia and Oceania together have the greatest number of endangered languages. With the rich diversity of languages under threat, language coverage across the subdisciplines of the language sciences has remained uneven. Without diversity in the languages investigated, our understanding of language acquisition may be at best premature and at worst misguided. This is true of monolingual development and more so in bilingual and multilingual development. Studying diverse languages across diverse contexts is necessary to avoid making incorrect claims about universals. The situation in cognitive fields like the cognitive sciences is very similar. Research has been dominated by English-speaking researchers studying other English speakers. Now let's consider the pairing of target languages being acquired and the diversity of combinations. If we take an earlier figure, 6,909 languages spoken in the world, how many possible permutations of language pairs are there? The answer is over 23 million. These astounding figures make us pause to appreciate the potential of bilingual children's experiences in language development. Yet most studies have focused on pairs with English plus an Indo-European language. We know very little about how other typologically divergent pairs are acquired. Let's take a look at CHILDS, the world's largest repository for child language acquisition data. A large proportion, 74% of the bilingual corpora contain Indo-European language pairs or triplets. The inventory shows that Indo-European languages remain heavily represented with few pairs involving non-Indo-European languages like Chinese English, Hebrew English, Japanese, Dutch, etc. From 2012 to 2022, all language pairs in CHILDS include an Indo-European language. Most corpora pair 2 Indo-European languages, and non-Indo-European languages have remained underrepresented. And the proportion is around 30% over the past 10 years, and 40% feature trilingual development. A number of scholars have pointed to a need to move away from the idea of monolingualism as a norm. Jared Diamond and Nick Evans both argue that the natural state for human society is a multilingual one, such as we see in hunter-gatherer societies. Rothman and colleagues call into question the necessity and validity of monolingual controls and the default expectation of monolingual data as the baseline. This approach is a way to foster increased diversity, inclusivity, and equity in bilingualism research. Bilinguals are actually the global majority, and this is the basis for treating bilingual and multilingual acquisition as typical instead of taking monolingualism as the norm, which it is not. Understudied and underrepresented languages and dialects can be included to expand the empirical database. So to diversify bilingual acquisition research, it's important to include diverse language pairs In particular, typologically divergent pairs with points of contrast, such as languages with tone and those with stress. We have a paper showing how tone and stress interact in the Hong Kong bilingual children in a recent paper. We can also include the study of pairs involving Cantonese, which is generally regarded as a dialect. Mandarin and Cantonese are often mistaken for having the same grammar, but in fact, they are mutually unintelligible. Cantonese has its own grammar and identity. One important research question is, does the bilingual advantage apply to speakers of Cantonese and Mandarin? The inclusion of homeland and heritage acquisition contexts will also enrich our understanding of bilingual acquisition research. Heritage children have unique profiles that cannot simply be treated as L1 or L2 learners. Our research center at CUHK has produced the largest bilingual and multilingual child language corpora, yet we hold the record in this category. Very thankful to have the continued support of Professor Brian MacWhinney, Director of CHILDS. This brings me to the Child Heritage Chinese corpus created by the Childhood Bilingualism Research Centre. We see this as a step toward diversifying child language acquisition research. In terms of language pairs, we look at Cantonese as well as Mandarin paired with English. In terms of the acquisition context, the corpus allows us to compare heritage speakers of Chinese with homeland speakers. In terms of data collection, we've developed remote methods for recording children's speech in addition to on-site methods. While this work was done in the pre-COVID years, little did we realize that remote methods would become the new normal. Heritage contexts pose acquisition challenges and differ from homeland contexts in that the parents are immigrants with second-generation children born and raised in the US. Heritage children's exposure to Chinese is reduced to varying extents compared to the homeland counterparts. One key question we are interested in is how the reduction of heritage language input impacts heritage language development. In heritage bilingualism, the child's dual input changes rapidly over the course of development. In the early years, the child may hear primarily the heritage language. So for example, 70% Chinese in the home and 30% English in the environment. But as the child engages with English speakers outside the home, the balance of input will shift to 60, 40, 30, 70, etc. And in some extreme cases, Chinese input may be reduced to 0. The three heritage children exemplify 3 types of childhood bilingualism. Luna is a sequential bilingual with exposure to mostly Mandarin at home and then to English at school. Alvia is a simultaneous bilingual exposed to both Mandarin and English from birth in a one-parent, one-language situation. Winston is trilingual, hearing Cantonese from the mother, Mandarin from the father, and English outside the home. Now let's focus on Winston. His case illustrates how the one-parent, one-language approach, 一亲一语, combines with the one-context, one-language approach, 一静一语. His mother speaks Cantonese to him, whereas his father speaks Mandarin to him. Both Cantonese and Mandarin are his home languages. He hears and speaks English outside his home. And in the case of Winston, the grandparents really made a difference. Winston was able to benefit from their Cantonese and Mandarin input, and they made an effort to spend time with him and provide additional input. This is so wonderful for intergenerational transmission, an effective way to boost the language input. And his parents also experimented with different programs. And then finally, they chose a bilingual program when he turned 3. His parents were strongly determined to raise Winston trilingual and develop relatively balanced abilities in Cantonese, Mandarin, and English. They paid close attention to his language development and worked with our research team to monitor and adjust the amount of input in the languages. The released corpus, so what you can find in the Child Archive, contains Winston's longitudinal development over a 2-year period, 23 hours of multimedia recordings in Cantonese, Mandarin, and English from 1 year, 7 months to 3 years, 7 months. Here are some methodological innovations. We have 3 kinds of recordings. Parents were asked to make the recordings of their interactions with the child at home. We also recruited RAs in Seattle to visit the family and do the recording on site. And then the RAs on our CUHK campus conducted online video calls and interacted with the children. This was all done in the pre-COVID period. So we were glad that we pioneered this technique early enough. Okay, so this shows you how a recording session is set up. And by the way, we only use the remote data collection method with children older than 2.5, and for no more than 15 minutes at a time. So the preparations for the recording sessions include getting the puppets and picture books ready. And we got some really encouraging feedback from the parents. The recording sessions turned out to be one of the most anticipated activities. The children are very engaged and keep talking to the parents about what they do during the recording. The parents are also passionate about passing on the language as part of the culture and heritage through the next generation. They'll make every effort to pass on the heritage. Using the 360-degree camera for recording enables us to capture a much bigger picture of the context and physical surroundings in which the interactions take place. It's also cost-saving and easy to operate. So this photo shows how the American RA conducts the recording. And here's Winston with his Cantonese-speaking mother. Winston with the Mandarin-speaking father. This graph shows Winston's mean length of utterance, MLU, over time. So let me explain what MLU is. So MLU is generally considered an objective measure. So this is the average number of morphemes in every utterance in a transcript. And this is a way to quantify the growth and complexity of his development of the 3 languages. The MLU chart shows he's pretty balanced in 3 languages. He's equally productive in 3 languages, especially at around age 3. And he has this amazing ability to switch between languages effortlessly. So I'm going to show you a video of Winston translanguaging, drawing on his knowledge of 3 languages. So you're going to hear that the researcher asks a question. So how do you say kitchen in Chinese? And Winston replies using all 3 of his languages in the same sentence. So he says, baby, we can't say kitchen in Chinese using Mandarin for the sentence topic, Chinese, right, the name of the language. Then he switched to Cantonese to say, there's no way to say it, and quoting the English word kitchen. So in the Wei's terms, this is a case of capturing a unique moment, what he calls momentarity. This also showcases his metalinguistic awareness. He's able to name his languages and talk about them. As applied linguists, we think of translanguaging as something valuable, but to the public at large, it's still seen as a sign of deficiency and result of lack of proficiency, which is a big misconception. Our professional view is that translanguaging is a sign of competence and creativity. The utterances produced in translanguaging show more complexity than single language utterances. And there's an urgent need to dispel these misconceptions and help parents and educators understand it's totally natural to translanguage and appreciate the benefits of translanguaging. Rethinking co-mixing as translanguaging will shed light on bilingual children's early development. There's important implications for pedagogy in K-12 classrooms, where multiple languages need to be honored and respected. Opening up translanguaging space is not just for adults, but for children's learning and communication. Scholars such as Li Wei, Ophelia Garcia have led the way in promoting translanguaging space in the classroom, and Danping Wang has explored how this can be done in the context of Chinese language pedagogy. There's good evidence that it's positively related to language competency, not deficiency, in support of the dominant and weaker language development. While co-mixing is often misunderstood and underappreciated, we hope the findings of our study help to dispel such misunderstanding and shed light on its benefits in facilitating bilingual children's language development. In our own work, we can see the value of translanguaging in the complexity of mixed utterances. So here's the MLU chart for Winston's utterances with and without co-mixing. So if you look at the top line, you can see that his mixed utterances show the highest MLU, suggesting more complexity than his monolingual utterances. This is compelling argument for the facilitating effects of translanguaging in children. Our study of the 3 heritage children shows how children can develop native-like proficiency in their heritage language in the preschool years. Keys to success include a language ecology with regular and rich input, as well as forming an identity linked to their heritage language and culture. Parents play a critical role in cultivating a positive attitude and instilling a sense of respect and appreciation for their heritage in the children. Winston's mother is most passionate about her identity as a Cantonese speaker. She wanted to make sure that her son grew up speaking Cantonese. That is the key to access and connect with Cantonese culture. She made it a priority in her planning. Of course, she hopes Winston will be able to order dim sum in a restaurant, but also to read poetry in Cantonese. It's important to know how to order food in Cantonese, but reading tongue poetry is just as important. So Winston's mother keeps thinking, it's my responsibility to pass on my language as part of my culture to the next generation. This is an identity issue, is very important. Winston's case also points to the importance of grandparents in transmitting heritage language. His grandparents provided input in Cantonese and Mandarin, helping to balance out input in the three languages. They don't have to be close by physically. They can interact with the grandchildren by FaceTime or Zoom. If language shift takes place so quickly, one consequence is that the heritage children can no longer talk to their grandparents, which is especially serious in Chinese culture, where grandparents traditionally remain a big part of the family group and play a big role in bringing up their grandchildren. This is the standard picture of language shift in immigrant families. So the first generation of native speakers settle in another country and their children grow up bilingual in their parents' language and the language of the community. The third generation may be essentially monolingual in the community language. But there are also cases where language shift takes place within 2 generations, as documented by Lily Wong Fillmore. American immigrants often end their heritage language learning after 2 or 3 generations in the US, and it's now becoming more common to shift into English within 2 generations. So part of our goal is to look at how language shift takes place in the heritage children. You're able to capture some early signs of language shift. I'm going to show you another video. This shows the stage where Winston begins to show reluctance to speak Chinese despite his father's prompting. So he keeps saying that he doesn't remember how to tell the story in Chinese. And pay attention to his intonation. It really sounds like a child complaining in English, which is an example of cross-linguistic influence at the prosodic level. So let's watch the video.
你先弄一个讲故事给自己。
我也讲关于路的。
不，你讲一个中文的自己也会听。
中文的我不会讲。
我来帮你放吧。你讲那个小猴子吃桃子那个故事好不好？
我不吃，我知道怎么讲的。
昨天你会讲啊？我们讲的是那个，我是讲了很久很久的。
那个是大象来做。
哦，大象来做客金建华，然后呢？大象。好了，放好了。大象因为太……
我不记得怎么讲。
昨天会讲很多。
我不记得怎么讲了。
那
我记得怎么讲好多，可是然后我就不记得。
没关系啊，我们就讲，然后就讲到你不会讲的地方，好不好？
我不要。
Mister， 来，我们讲大象来做客金建华，好不好？大象长得太高。
我
个什么吧，阿里巴巴和
可我不知道怎么
讲哦讲不完，因为讲不完，对不对？
我不知道怎么叫。
那我们没问题吗？
So, how do we deal with such situations which may come up again and again as the child's exposure to English increases? My suggestion for parents is to keep speaking the language, no matter what, and insist that the child speak it despite their reluctance, and don't ever give up, never give up. All right, so the question is language shift inevitable? This is a fascinating case study by Audrey Lee and Stephen Matthews about how language shift from Mandarin to English can be reversed. This is a 3-generation family living in California. In this photo, the parents are second generation, meaning that they were born in the US. They grew up as heritage speakers of Chinese, but didn't use it much as adults. So when they had children, the third generation, they wanted them to acquire Chinese and become true bilinguals. Well, because they think it's cool to be bilingual. But how could they if it wasn't used in the family? So the second generation parents began relearning Chinese and use it more in order to speak it to their children. So the third generation children grew up bilingual, at least in the preschool years. The third generation children have Mandarin as their heritage language. As such, it has some interesting distinctive properties. The syntax is influenced by English, as we can see in the placement of locative prepositional phrases. So in this example, 我跟 Mira 玩在学校. So 玩在学校. So we have the verb 玩 and then followed by the locative at school. So it might not sound interesting to English speakers because it is exactly the order you find in English, but this is actually ungrammatical. So we have documented this phenomenon in our bilingual children in Hong Kong acquiring Chinese and English. They have a tendency to put the locative phrase after the verb. Okay. So, in English, locative phrases consistently come after the verb, as in, I eat at this place. But in Chinese, such a locative phrase typically comes before the verb, as in, 我在这里吃饭. So literally, I here eat. Okay. If you use the English order, so the result is ungrammaticality. So this contrast is typologically significant since Chinese is unusual in having verb-object order, but prepositional phrase before the verb. Now let's see what happens in our heritage children's Chinese. Here's a really cute example where Winston talks about how his dad makes a living. This is a cute way of referring to his dad's job as a software engineer. Please pay attention to how Winston puts the locative phrase 在电脑上 on the computer after the verb, which goes against the rule we just stated.
我的爸爸要上班，还要赚钱，挣电 上。
好，你的爸爸是这个样子站起来，好棒哦，真好。
And we hypothesize that he's following English grammar here. And here's the result on Cantonese locative phrases. Winston patterns like Catherine, the homeland bilingual, both show a preference for VPP, postverbal placement of the locative phrase, whereas monolingual children prefer the other order, PBV, preverbal placement of the locative. What about the Mandarin locative phrases? So is the result on Mandarin locative phrases? There's quite a bit of individual variation among the three heritage children. Luna shows a similar pattern to the monolingual children. Avia shows a strong preference for VPP, postverbal placement. Winston also shows a preference for postverbal placement. And unlike the others, he produces some non-target forms as shown in the blue, in this graph. So this is quite striking and caught our attention. We've seen some properties of heritage bilingualism here. Naturally, there's some influence of the majority language on the developing heritage language, as we saw in the case of locative phrases, where the invariant order in English has an influence on the Chinese order. Placement of locative phrases in postverbal position is an area where we see the convergence of heritage Chinese and English grammar. Well, you may be asking, what about the influence of Chinese on their English? So indeed, there's some influence in that direction, but I won't go into the examples in this talk. We also saw, even in this brief analysis, how individual children differ from each other. Of the three heritage children we studied, each shows a different pattern. Luna shows a similar pattern like monolinguals, whereas Avia shows strong preference for postverbal placement of the locative phrase, and Winston produces non-target forms not found in monolinguals. Here's the take-home message. I've talked about how to work toward diversification in three respects. In terms of language pairs, it's important to go beyond Indo-European languages and include typologically diverse and underrepresented languages. The context of acquisition can include heritage contexts and innovative data collection methods, both online, remote, and on-site can be developed. And the question about monolingualism as norm raises a host of other questions. The monolingual normativity bias is actually quite deeply entrenched. Who are the real bilinguals? Who are the real monolinguals? To what extent do we need monolinguals as controls in our studies on bilinguals? These are questions that deserve more thinking. And we need to rethink language mixing as translanguaging and present this view to the public, demonstrating the benefits of translanguaging. And the last point is about keys to success in heritage language acquisition. What makes it work is a strong ecology created by parents and grandparents who provided an input-rich environment and instilled in their children a strong sense of identity with the heritage language and culture. I'd like to draw your attention to a new set of corpus data, which we will be releasing shortly. The new data come from our fourth heritage child, Sophie, and 4 bilingual children growing up with Mandarin and English in Hong Kong. And just a few weeks ago, we presented a paper based on their data at a conference in Sydney. This is also part of Melody Shang's PhD thesis on Mandarin noun modifying clauses in heritage and homeland bilinguals. Here are some voices from our heritage children. They are just so proud of their heritage and the ability to speak 2 or more languages. And I'd like to thank the heritage children and the families for their participation in the project. In particular, Maggie Mai for her incredible leadership, dedication, and ingenuity in pioneering the remote data collection way before the COVID period. Special thanks go to each and every member of the Childhood Bilingualism Research Centre who made it possible to study the heritage children in the US and bilingual children in Hong Kong. Please stay tuned. This is something to look forward to. Merci beaucoup. 谢谢. Thank you, everyone.